It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Arizona Cardinals fans, welcome, and this is the Redbird Reboot podcast. Of course, we've got Blake Murphy and Marcos Labrada. And Marcos, we've got just too much, it seems like, to talk about today. It's the peak free agency week. Cardinals have made some signings. Cardinals have lost a few players, and some other teams have been making moves around within the NFL landscape. Cardinals themselves even make a trade. They are in a unique spot now heading into next season. We can start off, of course, with just some of the signings as they came, but how are you doing as we kick off our show?
Well, I'm doing good because at least for the first time, it seems that we actually had some movement during free agency where we're not really used to getting any movement during free agency.
No, I think so as well. There's a lot I think that we can go over, and we've got at least a good amount of work for the Arizona Cardinals still to go. So let's go ahead and we can kick it off as far as looking at just some of these moves. We've got Arizona Cardinals signing the likes of Justin Jones, defensive tackle. They signed Mike linebacker Mac Wilson, and of course, cornerback Sean Murphy Bunting. A lot of these moves on the first day of free agency. And we can talk about Bilal Nichols here in a second because I think he deserves maybe his own slide for what he's done. But the biggest thing that we saw with the Cardinals going into this offseason that we realized was their defense needed a lot of work. They needed help, and they went out and got in a few veterans who will take on some starting spots, particularly, I think, cornerback Sean Murphy Bunting and Mac Wilson as well. What are some of your thoughts, at least here, just starting off at least with the likes of Sean Murphy Bunting? I think he was the biggest splash that the Cardinals made on that first day of free agency. Athletic corner, former second-round pick by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Did quite a bit of work as an outside corner and worked for the Tennessee Titans this last season. He cashes in at about $10 million or so a year under a 3-year contract. And this seems to be that veteran cornerback signing that we expected, just coming to fruition, Marcos. Yeah, check that microphone.
Yeah, there we go.
At least.
Yeah, there we go. So when it comes to him, I followed his career just a little bit when it came to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the trio of corners they've had. They've had Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis, and those were the ones that I was hoping that we were able to snag off. Sean Murphy Bunting has always been as like the third corner behind those two, and the reason why is because he's been like a mid-tier type of corner. So is he able to hold down a starting job? Yes. Is he better or should be better than Antonio Hamilton, who we've been relying on for the last 2 years to be able to take the starter role? He should be. And just given the draft status and given the fact that he's a 4-3 type of corner, and I know later on in his career that's not going to be the case anymore, but he's still an athletic corner and a good-sized corner that we actually need. I mean, this is something to hold down that position for now. So it's just one of those, hey, we're giving you a contract here. We just need you to hold it down. Obviously, we're not, going to pay you like a top-notch corner, but we need somebody to take that position, either come in, help these rookies, develop as a second and third cornerbacks or, as one me in the slot, and just, hey, we just need you to hold it down.
No, absolutely. The way that Sean Murphy Bunting, I think you described as being one of those players who's not going to maybe be a cornerback 1, not going to maybe be a cornerback 3, but is one of those guys that on a elite team, he's hopefully your cornerback 3. For a team like the Cardinals, who is in the process of a type of rebuild, he is one of those cornerback 2 type of players. I'm going to take a look over here, at least with one of the things I love to look at when players sign. You can always look at charts when they come out, but just being able to look at someone's mock draftable charts. Some of you guys have seen this before. It basically takes a lot of how their athletic testing went at the combine and puts it in a percentile against the other types of players that are there. Uh, Bunting, at least, as you can see, was a second round pick. He was at a small school in central Michigan, but he came in, at least for the most part, with a pretty set profile. It wasn't too far as being slight but fast, wasn't too heavy and slow. Being able to at least see how he's played in the last few seasons, it hasn't necessarily, I think, lived up to that second round billing, at least from a year ago. I think some of that may be just the fact that he was cornerback number 3 for the 2020 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But you're talking about a guy who, if you need to get a cornerback 1, he's at least shown that he's got not just the athleticism to keep up with guys, taller corner, of course, but he does also have much better veteran savvy as far as reaction time. He's not going to basically be baited on double throw, I should say double moves as much. You can see at least that there's some couple of comps where there's some success that's there. Obviously, at least we can see how Will Blackman, Kyle Fuller being probably the biggest name up there. Christian Gonzalez, who is a first round pick out of Oregon last year, you can see at least. So it's one of those spots where when we talk about free agency, you got to recognize that players reach free agency for a reason. One of the reasons why the great Larry Fitzgerald was never a free agent is because he was too valuable for the Cardinals to ever let him hit the market. Guys that teams are okay with moving on from. Sometimes it comes down to payment or other reasons, or that a team doesn't value them as much as maybe 2 or 3 guys together for that price. That's one of the things with free agency is you're going to see some successes. You're also going to see some guys who do disappoint. Marcos, when it comes to the cornerback room, we know at least what the Cardinals have been, where they have Garrett Williams, who's been taking over the slot corner. Keetrell Clark was a draft pick last year. And Sean Murphy Bunting is going to be kind of put into that mix. It feels like the Cardinals are still probably at least one cornerback away from being able to kind of field what you say is a competent corner room. I think in a best case scenario, you'd probably say, hey, could they draft a number 1 cornerback with that second first round pick? Maybe if in a trade back scenario, which we'll talk about later. I think that's one of those places of where you don't want to just overhype and say like, oh, this guy's going to be like an Antonio Cromartie shutting guys down across from Patrick Peterson of a signing. But it does feel like you're at least going to be able to take a step up from the corners being rookies and Marco Wilson for the majority of last year.
Well, like, see, that's how this game of like free agency happens. That's why a lot of people will say, "Hey, how does this dictate the draft for a certain team?" Because of the fact that they filled up some certain spots. I would like for them to still take a cornerback, with that second first round pick. But this is signaling to me that they're probably not going to prioritize that position, even though Sean Murphy Bunting is not like SMB. That's what I call him, even though he's not the end all be all at the position, even though like I don't see him as a shutdown corner that you're gonna be confident in sending up against like those top notch wide receivers, and he's gonna be able to like hold his ground or like shut them down. He might have a few good games, but he's gonna be one of those corners that's gonna have good games and bad games all in one season, and that's what his history has shown. Can he prove me wrong? Yes, absolutely, and I wish he could do that. But that's what it's signaling to me. Like when they went out to go get SMB, they were saying, you know what, like we need to plug up this hole. We might not have to prioritize this position because we have to have our mindset with another position that's coming up. And maybe that could be defensive tackle, even though they've filled up that position. Maybe that could be outside linebacker, or maybe that could be tackle like they've hinted at getting ever since releasing DJ Humphries. And I know they signed another tackle that could hold up in that position. But it's one of those situations where you really are trying to read to what they're saying, and this says to me like, hey, we've addressed the position, so it's not that high of a priority. If somebody falls to us, great, but if they don't, then we're set at that position.
No, I definitely agree with you. That's one of the cases of with the Cardinals being depleted as they were, they kind of took a down year, accumulate cap, accumulate resources, kind of fix some of those areas, and then making some of those investments. So let's go ahead here and we will talk about the next player, at least on our list, which is going to be um, defensive lineman Justin Jones. Now, with Justin Jones, what's interesting about him and Bilal Nichols, the other defensive tackle, is that you're going to be getting a guy who has been a very consistent player overall because he's been on the field, just has hardly missed any time, been a super healthy defensive tackle. He's not one of the guys that you're going to say is going to be a high level penetrator as far as being able to get off the ball quick, getting upfield, being a little bit smaller sized. When you look at him compared to some other defensive tackles, you can at least see that he's going to be above average with his weight, wingspan, and then arm length. So you're talking about a long arm tackle. You're also not talking about too many deficiencies as far as within his athleticism. One of the things that's interesting is Sean Murphy Bunting's played in a lot of games. Justin Jones played in a lot of games. And if you really want to get into it, Bilal Nichols is also one of those guys who honestly is a lot more athletic, came from Delaware, and he probably profiles at least a lot more similar to how like Mike Neal, the defensive tackle for the Packers, was coming out. He has been a very, very well-rounded athlete. He's missed, I believe, 2 games since I believe it was 2019 season where he missed part of time. But that's really been the only time that he's missed. He's been a stalwart for the Raiders. They go out instead and sign a pretty big splash in Christian Wilkins to have that defensive mentality with their coach. But it feels like between these guys, there's not the Christian Wilkins that I think a lot of Cardinals fans were hoping for and wanted. I think there was a lot of people who felt the Cardinals were in, with the Cardinals not in. And at the end of the day, when he went for $110 million, $82 million guaranteed, it did feel like it was a bit out of Arizona's price range. I think that what you look at, Marcos, is the Cardinals wanted to bring in veterans and not just rely on Dante Stills and a first round pick, maybe, but they're also looking for guys who don't get hurt. I think that's the story of the Cardinals in 2023 with their defensive tackles. That like every other game, somebody was getting hurt and missing time. The hope is that these guys will not have that happen to them because they have a track record of being pretty healthy.
This screams 2020 Cardinals free agency when it came to like plugging up and they on that 2020 free agency they went ahead and went in multiple positions and upgraded those positions per se because they looked at how their 2019 performance was and it was horrible. And so they said, you know what, if we get these players and we just upgrade these positions, we should be better and we should be able to hold up better. So with Justin Jones, once again, good, like, above average signing. Of course, not the top notch guy. It wasn't Christian Wilkins, but I mean, that was going to be a bidding war. And if the Cardinals were going to try to win that bidding war, it was going to be a pretty steep price. And as to a certain degree, I do agree with what Monty and what like Michael Bidwell say. Like when it comes to like spending and free agency, like you overpay for most free agents, especially those who like perform, and you're not paying for the performance they gave. You're paying for the performance they project. So
Correct.
you have no idea what's going to happen to them. So with that, like, I mean, it's a solid like signing. It's just one of those, once again, one of those situations, one of those guys where, hey, we're not the end all be all, but you're an above average signing. You and Bilal Nichols, which is the other tackle that is signed, you guys should be able to compete. You guys should be in a rotation. You guys will be put in that middle. We're not going to be reliant on 1 year free agents or on the inconsistent of Lucky Fotu, who I love as a player and as a prospect, I was over the moon that we got him, but he hasn't been able to hold up at that position and show the dominance there. So we need somebody, especially like we need some run stuffers. Like we finally need some
Mhm.
run stuffers, and it looked like they went out and got him. So, like, I mean, good on that. Like same situation. They're not the end all be all.
Absolutely. That's one of the cases I think a lot of people have wondered was where are the Cardinals at as a team? Are they ready to kind of make a playoff push? Are they ready to try to make it? There's always that chase for a ring. And at the same time, I think you can talk about, hey, like people will always go and compare to if you're gonna go out and you're feeling hungry, there's gonna be like a 5-star meal you can get like super high line, like you're gonna be kind of maxing out the credit card for. You're also gonna have that person who can go over and start shopping at Taco Bell, at least. And a lot of times you can kind of know what you're going to get with the two of those. It's really kind of those mid-tier spots. So, like, have you ever been to a family restaurant that ends up being a little bit better than you expected? Like, it's a pretty good chef. You're able to actually, like, oh, wow, like, they use, cracked eggs and real potatoes versus, just using stuff out of a mix or something. I think that's probably part of Monty Austinfort's approach. And we've seen that as an approach before be pretty effective with the New England Patriots. When Bill Belichick was essentially kind of run out of town, I should say, which I think maybe he did not deserve, but it came due to a lot of poor personnel choices in which instead of keeping Tom Brady, keeping kind of costs down and investing in through the draft, they really needed to take a swing with Mac Jones, who's now a Jacksonville Jaguar, and they needed to take a swing on some big free agent signings at receiver and line, and just did not end up panning out. It seems like the Cardinals are trying to be more of this responsibly building their team, as others have said. And let's see, at least as far as another one of those responsible team building moves, let's talk about Mac Wilson, because he's a guy who's an undrafted free agent linebacker out of Alabama. And he at about 2,000, I think 245 pounds, 6 foot, so a little bit shorter, but he profiles as a Mike linebacker. And I think that this is exactly what the Cardinals are looking for, because when you look at the likes of a Kaiser White, he's a little bit smaller, much more of when he came in, we're like, okay, that's your playmaking role, like where you wanted Isaiah Simmons to hopefully play in that 4-3-3-4 hybrid defense. He's one of those guys who's not going to have that same speed. You can see he didn't even actually run at the combine, but he has been a very solid inside linebacker for the Patriots, who hasn't gotten as many snaps. But when he has played on the field, he's at least looked good. I think this is one of those moves, Marcos, where you're still probably going to be looking for your long-term, middle of the field kind of guy who's calling your defense. It's probably going to still be Kaiser White, but now instead of being in the middle of that defense and having to take all those blows at 225, you can move Kaiser to another side. He can rush the passer some, move into coverage a bit, having Mac be that guy who is at the center of your defense. And he had an 80-plus run stopping grade from Pro Football Focus in his last year with the Browns. I think this is one of those players who you're talking about being able to put your best players in their best spot. I think that he's more of an addition by moving Kaiser White into that playmaking role, and hopefully he can stand up well enough from the Mike spots that the Cardinals can build, because Kaiser kind of had to play that Mike spot last year because they just did not have the talent when they had to move guys like Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons into different positions or off the team entirely. What are some of your thoughts, at least, about this Mac Wilson signing by the Cards?
Well, I still think that, like, especially at that size that Zaven Collins has, they should just stop messing with them with this development, and they're not going to move him back to the inside. I already know that, so it doesn't matter how many times I say it, Walter Mitchell says it, or anybody else says it. It doesn't matter. They're not moving him back, so I know that already. With this guy, I love what I see when it comes to like the greats, and I love what I see when it comes to like, the ability to be a good run stuffer, because that's what we've needed. We've needed a run stuffer at Mike linebacker position for like almost a decade now. We have not had that type of a player. We had it for 1 year with Jordan Hicks, and then he quickly fell off in 2020 after he had a great 2019 season. So, as far as filling up that role, great. One thing that gives me pause is the same thing that always gives me pause about these ex-Patriots players who play for the New England Patriots. They play great in Bill Belichick's system, and then they leave, and then they play mid-tier, or then they get benched, or they get traded, and that always seems to be the case for some reason. And then, they get that big contract, they go back to New England, they play in that system again, because, like, there's no question when it comes to New England, they do have a system. They do play a certain system. They do teach a lot of discipline there. Like they're all about like you need to do your specific job and nothing else. You don't freelance. You don't try to make the read and think to yourself, oh, hey, if I do this, I'll get that tackle for loss. And because if you whiff on that tackle for loss, there goes that big gap that you left wide open for that running back to make that cut back to like a 20-yard gain. And we all know how he treats those type of players. He pulls them off the bench, or he shows them the film afterwards and says, what were you thinking here? So with him coming over, like he's going to profile as our Mike, of course, which means that Kaiser should be bumped over to the will, and that's the spot he played with with the Eagles when he had that really good season. Well, we know T.J. Edwards was the Mike linebacker there, so at least that puts them in positions where they are not only most familiar with, but they're better at. That's their best positions as what they profile as. So my hope for Mac is that it's not one of those cases where the system actually made him good and he actually can show this year that it shouldn't be a dip from last year. So my hope is that he just kind of steadies out from there. He understands like what kind of defensive role he's playing here, what kind of assignments, gap assignments always change with different systems because this is a Vic Fangio type of system, well, quote unquote. And New England runs more like they run more like it's kind of weird. It's like a Saban molded with a Belichick system because they were both on the same defensive staff when they were back with the Browns. So they have their own little system that kind of has evolved and molded to different types of things. And yeah, they get their like for example, Vance Joseph took pieces of it, but I'm not sure if Vic Fangio has the same type of terminology or the same type of defense. So he's coming into a different system, and he's going to have to get acclimated to that. You're on mute.
Yes, I am. So yes, it's something to be interesting with every single system that you see is there are players who can adjust and adapt into different systems, and there's some players who at the end of the day are best in a certain system, and there's some players who are kind of made by the system. And that's one of the things that we would see a lot of times is the Patriot way kind of was Bill Belichick. Now, he at least has brought in for that a guy who was under that, played in that system in Gerard Mayo. So I agree with you. It's probably not going to be exactly the same. We've got a lot of people, at least over here for the most part. Thank you guys for tuning in. Let's go ahead and check in now with one of the biggest pieces of help for the Cardinals, at least, which is going to be offensive line. Now, we've got this was something that we found out about probably a little bit before it broke. Some Cardinals fans heard that there was a potential for a little splash signing, and it did pop up. That being Jonah Williams, the right/left tackle for the Cincinnati Bengals, who's been protecting Joe Burrow and Joe Burrow and company, because of course they did have that injury this year. The blind side, at least for this past year in Cincinnati, he also had been playing as a right tackle before, former first round pick. You can see also there's the picture of Bilal Nichols, who we discussed, who is that guy who's got athletic upside, was a fifth round pick on that spot. Then, of course, we have a new backup quarterback in tow. The assumption I think you would have is that whether it be a competition or not, that this is a place where the Arizona Cardinals were looking to add a veteran backup quarterback. They saw what they wanted to out of Josh Dobbs last year. He was able to kind of fetch them back enough of a draft pick, I think, from the Vikings. The amount of snaps he played. This is a guy who was a former third round pick, was part of that team that made the 14 playoff in Cincinnati. Really did not seem to show the case to be a starting quarterback in the NFL on that Atlanta Falcons team. And it was kind of a strange situation. So we see that the Arizona Cardinals are able to now kind of bring in that veteran backup. It does come with the loss of one and two other players we'll get to here in a second. But first of all, Marcos, before we talk about the offensive line and how that's going to be reshaped, what were your thoughts when you heard that the Cardinals were trading and acquired a new backup quarterback, especially one who has 2 years left of rookie contract salary on his deal? Seems like he may be the backup quarterback, or at least a guy you can work on, try to develop, see if he can eventually become a guy that you could maybe trade back for a slightly higher pick at some point. Seems like it'll be Ritter for the future.
Yeah. Well, Desmond Ritter was somebody that I had high hopes for. And of course, once he came to the NFL, those hopes were kind of dashed away with his development. He lost his job to Taylor Heineke. So he is somebody that is a developmental guy. I didn't think he was a developmental guy. He's an athletic quarterback who can run as well as just, have the somewhat arm talent to be able to like have good accuracy. That hasn't been the case in the NFL, but that's what he showed back when he was in Cincinnati. So I mean, when it comes to backup quarterback, we have our like bar isn't set very high. So this is somebody that's a
Right.
hopeful. And in process, we get rid of Rondale Moore, who I like. I've always said, I love Rondale Moore. I love the person. I love the prospect that he was. But even when he was drafted, I thought to myself, this is not a good pick because we already have that typecast wide receiver, and we're just like
Sure.
filling that wide receiver space with just more short 4-3 guys that are just gonna like clog up. And now we had to play them all in the field at the same time, and look how effective that is. So Rondell Moore, you get to go to, like, I believe that's where he's from. I'm not 100% sure. I know he's from the south, the southern
Yep.
states and
He's
stuff.
he's a Purdue kid at least who had that huge game against Ohio State. But like you're fundamentally right, I think about the fit. The Cardinals drafted him, and I think the idea was you wanted to be able to have kind of a field stretcher in Hollywood. You wanted to be able to have a guy in Rondell who could also be a field stretcher, but could make guys miss in short yardage. And then, of course, with the trade for DeAndre Hopkins, who would make a living being able to kind of go at all three levels. It felt like that was kind of the idea was you would have each guy would specialize in a different area. And you could like put Rondale in the backfield, move him out. What we really saw was that when they were in Cliff Kingsbury's offensive system, there was just so much emphasis of showing how the receivers needed to just go and get the ball quick, be able to get tackles to break free, because teams would just overload the Cardinals from the box. They would have usually the 5 offensive linemen would get overwhelmed, and you had to quickly get the ball out, which is why we saw bubble screen to Rondale Moore, bubble screen that goes over here to Hollywood. And there never was really enough health that happened for all three. Rondale, of course, is a guy who at 5'7", about 180 pounds or so, and had some big injuries in college. I think it was a spot where you can see why the plan could have worked, but I agree with you in that part of the reason I'll always remember that as a pick with Rondale Moore is because in the 2021 NFL draft, this was the year coming off of the Cardinals passing on the likes of CeeDee Lamb. This was the Cardinals passing on the likes of a Tristan Wirfs and going with a guy and a wide receiver that a lot of people were like, you need kind of that number 2 target. You didn't really get him previously. And what I think a lot of Cardinals fans can look back on at least and say is that at pick number 50, I think it was actually pick 49 was Rondale Moore. Pick number 63 was Kyler's own center block in college at Creed Humphrey. They ended up
Yeah.
passing on him. He goes on to become a Pro Bowler, snapping the ball, of course, for Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And you can see, even in the following year, the Cardinals in 2022, you're like, are they going to try to make a move for Devonta Smith or Jalen Waddle? Because they still needed that wide receiver, too. They end up, of course, going with the likes of trading a first-round pick for Hollywood Brown, getting back a third-round pick. And that kind of leads us, I think, to the next spot, of course, which is talking about 2 of these guys. We have Hollywood Brown, we have Rondale Moore, both no longer with the Arizona Cardinals. So this is the picture just from this past year at training camp. Neither of these guys are on the team anymore. Hollywood is heading to the champion Kansas City Chiefs. Some people had heard about it a day or two before that this was probably going to be the case. We know the Cardinals were looking to see if they could keep Hollywood. They did have a number. We don't know if he took less. We don't know if it was an equal offer. It does feel, though, like this was kind of an inevitable move because Hollywood Brown, if you have the opportunity to come back to Kyler Murray, you're only getting a 1-year deal for the Cardinals. They did not extend you back when they traded for you in 2022. You've had health issues the past couple of years, didn't finish the season essentially for the last 2 years. You've been effective when you've been in there, but you've never really been able to be that role that I think that they traded for him to be, which was we've got a wide receiver 1. This is our wide receiver 2 who's going to be able to take the top off the defense. He showed he could be a wide receiver 1, but also showed some issues with the injuries. And meanwhile, Rondale Moore, he goes to Atlanta to be able to be kind of that slot option / third receiver for Kirk Cousins, their new quarterback. And now you've got a lot of intrigue with Rondale Moore heading to those weapons with a veteran quarterback in Kirk Cousins. This is one of those times where it's always sad whenever you have to have a player leave the Cardinals, but these were 2 guys that the Cardinals put a lot of importance into. They traded a first and drafted this guy with a second, and neither of them at least get to see that second contract with Arizona. Marcos, it says a lot to me about just the Steve Keim era. It's almost been a rebuke by Monty Ossenfort to not extend or keep some of those guys, some of the players that they went all in on at the top of their draft classes. What are some of your thoughts there as far as this is a new look Cardinals team moving on without some of these receivers? And I think it shows that these smaller, quicker receivers just did not fit the Cardinals either then, and maybe they just are not fitting where the Cardinals want to be.
Well, like the if you want to talk about short game and shorts and screens and everything, Hollywood's going into a system that like they literally prioritize the short game. It's actually kind of astonishing to find out that um Patrick Mahomes has been outshorting Tom Brady when it comes to the quick passes and whatnot. So their scheme is going to be somewhere like if Hollywood really wants to succeed in that system, he's going to really start having to get acclimated to getting the ball quicker and being more of like a short slant stick route type of player 90% of the time, and then being somebody who can run over the top on certain occasions because the way they do that is they attack the short area. They bring defenses to come down, and then they attack over the top. Once those defenses come down, it's the
100%.
same. It's the same terminology or knowledge of like the three ball and the layup.
Yep.
Basically, you attack teams, you make them respect the three ball, and of course they leave that. They come up on you. You go ahead and you take them to the basket after that. So that's what it's gonna have to happen. I would say like out of all the people that were I will say that I have a ton of confidence that they were trying to do everything they can
Mhm.
to bring Marquise Hollywood Brown back. And I kept pushing back on that, thinking, saying like, you don't want to bring him back for many reasons. For
Mhm.
one, it's not just that he's produced effectively when he's been out there; he's taking snaps away from somebody who's a better producer. And Greg Dortch, every single time there's some sort of situation where we bring in a wide receiver, it doesn't matter who, if we draft one, if we whatever we do. Greg Dortch is the one who always gets the short end of the sticks and he gets pushed down. It doesn't matter what he does, how he produces, how many plays he gives us, how many touchdowns he scores. Oh my God, I was clipping some some um some film for the Pittsburgh game,
Mhm.
and I saw Kyler Murray throw a back shoulder fade over to a Greg Dortch as a 5'7" receiver. A five
Mhm.
seven receiver turning around, locating the ball like he's a 6'3" like T Higgins type of player, turning around and just catching that. Like, look at this. This is a play that he made. This
Mhm.
is a play that he decided he's not going down on. He catches the ball. He's like, and this is a short stick route right here. He makes the majority of it. He just kind of like settles in his spot and then he gets the ball right there and then he just turns around and starts taking off and he just makes all the moves he can. Breaks at least like four, like five tackles right there and he refuses
Yep.
to go down. So that's what you push down because no matter what the circumstance is, like because of draft status and because of name and because of like, oh hey, this guy's getting paid more, so we got to justify that paycheck because we need him to produce. So let's go ahead and force feed the ball to
Right.
Marquise Hollywood Brown to go ahead and justify. Like if the guy would have had like 700 yards, they would have given him a second contract easily. He couldn't even eclipse that. So that's why I'm like, thank you. Like you came over, but you got to go. You got to go because we need somebody more effective in that role. And now that you have this person, most likely, they're going to draft wide receiver in the draft. So you got your number one, you got your number two, Wilson. That's the possibility that
Mhm.
like foresee. It doesn't matter if it's going to be Wilson at the X with, like the likes of like those two wide receivers that I really want, or like how you want Malik Neighbors and you put, like, Wilson at the X and
Yeah.
Malik is probably going to be the move or the Z. It's you still need Greg Dortch out there to be the
Yeah.
the slot because of he can produce.
And that's one of the things I think is also like I think that when it comes to talent wise, you can say that there's no comparing that Hollywood Brown is more talented than a Greg Dortch. You can also say that the amount of production that Greg Dortch at least has been able to do with how he works in his role, there's a difference in how they impact the game. Dortch, of course, we've seen has been able to make plays over the middle. He's been able to make catches. He's not going to be one of those guys that can run like a 4.240 like a Hollywood Brown, but he is one of those players that when you do get the opportunities, despite the smaller size, that he is going to make different plays like this. And in one of those cases, if you said, "Hey, can we get more out of Greg Dortch at least by giving him a few more snaps?" and then instead of moving on, saying like, We're going to move on from Hollywood Brown. I think it's moving to a different place. And it's pretty easy to see a lineup for the Cardinals in which if they take Marvin Harrison Jr. at 4, he's able to line up and move around some of the formation. You probably would see Dortch go off the field in some of those 2 tight end sets, putting Michael Wilson as a bigger blocker out there. One of the things that was an issue with the Cardinals that we saw in a few games last year was when Michael Wilson wasn't out there, you're looking at Rondale, Greg Dortch, and Hollywood Brown having to be your blockers. In addition to, I know there's another receiver that they had who was 6'2" that they were able to bring in, but it just was a place where you need to still have guys that can put fear into a defense on the field. George isn't one of those guys who necessarily can put fear into a defense, but he's a guy who ultimately you put him on the field and he just produces. A lot of these guys in the NFL will just be those who maybe are a late day 3 pick or get undrafted, such as him. I think a lot of Cardinals fans can at least say that. Could you argue that paying Hollywood a bit more than the Chiefs and having him being in the slot to go with Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch would be better? I think so, but at the cost and for that price, I think the Cardinals are saying we're going to move to a bigger receiver overall. We're going to move and be able to have a different type of build. That's one thing that they did, at least I think, with one of their recent signings. So we have some size at wide receiver with Chris Moore. We also have a new signing that kind of we can talk about with that as well on the defensive line that can pop up here. This is from azcardinals.com's Darren Urban. They signed a new defensive lineman in Kyrie's Tonga. So he's going to be another guy up front. Like we said, the defensive line for the Cardinals was pretty destitute by the end of the season. Guys just were not healthy. Guys were not finishing. Guys were struggling to play game to game. It would just be like basically just a merry-go-round of players that were coming through on the defensive line. They also ended up signing Chris Moore, you can at least be able to see here, as a free agent. Last year he played for the Titans with 22 catches, 422 yards, and a 19.3 average, which means that on average, he was getting about 20 yards downfield. He's a guy that was taken out of, I believe, it was Cincinnati in the 2016 NFL draft. This is another guy with size that you're able to see, Marcos, that they've signed at least on the defensive line. I think that what we're seeing with Arizona is this is part of last year. The Cardinals, they made very few moves in free agency. You don't want to necessarily say that the Cardinals tanked, but I think a lot of people can look at it and say last year's free agency, they didn't have as much space. They had some dead money with DeAndre Hopkins. This year, they at least have had some room to work with, and I think that bringing in someone here like Tonga, in addition to the other 2 defensive linemen, it's pretty fun at least to be able to see. And let's get a little look at him now here with that mock draftable chart. So you can see he came out of BYU 2021, was kind of bounced around a little bit with the league. He spent some time previously. He's a short-armed guy that has a lot of strength. You can see here with that 20-yard split, some agility. He's at least kind of a little below average in the 3-cone and 20-yard shuttle at the defensive tackle side. For an interior defensive lineman, that's one of the spots where you can see that there's very little difference. You can see, at least compared to other defensive linemen who are probably heavier, the 300-pound guys, he's at least got a little bit more speed to him. When it comes to some of these types of players, a lot of times when you've got a short-armed defensive tackle who's trying to make it in the league, a lot of times what you want to see is say, hey, this guy's got long arms. And is he explosive? Well, yeah, if he's long arms and explosive and can get after the quarterback, that's that pass rush that you're looking for. Can shed blocks, get after the running back. With guys who have shorter arms, they kind of have to make a living in the league by just being a pass rusher, by kind of, even if someone's trying to get their arms on them, just doing a quick hit, getting that burst to get off. It feels like that this is one of those moves where it's kind of like if you talked about a Lucky Fotu as your prototypical nose tackle, big guy, at least who had some pass rushing upside that we saw every once in a while. This would be kind of one of those guys that may be closer to what Rashard Lawrence was. Didn't have the same type of measurables as Rashard Lawrence. He's a little bit slimmer, I believe, as far as it goes. He's about 325 pounds and short arms and some burst. He's not going to be maybe that top tier, like elite type of player that you're talking about that has all of the traits. But he can at least be one of those guys that fits in a rotation into certain roles, especially if you're talking about him on the interior. I think between him and then with the signing of Chris Moore, Marcos, and Chris Moore, of course, is one of those players who kind kind of came in as a fifth rounder pick. I believe he was originally drafted by the Baltimore Ravens. It's pretty easy to see what his skill set is. He is going to not be the tallest guy. He's going to have some explosiveness. You can see at least in that broad jump. His 40-yard dash is not the fastest as far as being a burner, but what can you do with that size? You can at least be able to have explode off the line and get up and catch the ball there. You can just see with some of the wide receiver comparisons for him. And obviously, he's not going to be going out there like a Justin Jefferson. He's not going to be going out there like a Brandon Ayuk. Those are guys who have elite traits and elite play on the field. But I think it is a good spot to say that, yeah, the Cardinals, they needed to get more size. And I think it fits with a shorter quarterback in Kyler Murray and for this new Cardinals team that wants to be able to actually be physical, not just in being able to run the ball, but also having physical receivers who can make catches. I think that Chris Moore is a guy that you add to that mix who can now be able to compete with some of the other lower receivers on your team with size, and that's something that I think the Cardinals could really use, Marcos.
Yeah, excuse me. My cat decided she wants to eat some food. Um, so they are showing that they know what they have in Kyler Murray. So they're trying to surround him with like big size receivers because they already tried, and of course they tried during the Steve Chimera to give him like the speedsters, the shorter guys, but the faster guys, the ones that are supposed to, stack on corners, like on post routes, and then he just slings it down the field. And what has that produced? Not enough like production. So they think to themselves, hey, with the shorter quarterback that can like throw back shoulder fades like for days and whatnot, and it's like the get up and get it type of quarterback. Like I'm gonna throw it in a spot where only you're gonna catch it, or where you're gonna fight for it and you're gonna win. Like let's give him somebody that can fight for that. It doesn't matter if there's a corner draped on a wide receiver. You need that size. You need that person that can like be that post up guy. So with the signing of Chris Moore, that's what that signals. They're trying to get away from the whole like we're signing short receivers. They have their short receiver. They signal to me that like Greg Dortch is like he produced well enough. He's going to be our short guy. Everybody else, we need to start signing size all over the field. We're probably going to draft a wide receiver that's either going to be it's going to be guaranteed to be over 6 foot, either 6 foot or over. So when it comes to like what they're going forth with, they're like we're not going to mess around with these short, quick receivers anymore. We're gonna go with route running. We're gonna go with size. We're gonna go with hands. We're gonna go with everything that's gonna be
Yeah.
intangible because in this system, Kyler Murray will be throwing a lot of stick and slant routes, and you don't need speed for that. You need size. I mean, you need hands, and you need physical people that aren't gonna be afraid of taking on contact with corners. They're gonna be the kind of people that are gonna fight through contact.
Right.
So with that, hey, we're moving off of that. Like we're gonna build on Kyler Murray's strengths. We're not gonna do the whole spiel anymore. Where we're gonna figure out what we're gonna do. And then as far as defensive tackle, like I mean, more depth as I've told you before.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not end all be all, but hey, they know that like when it comes to defensive tackle, we can't keep him healthy, so we have to stuff that position with a bunch of like mid tier type of players. So you know, hey, the more the merrier, I guess.
Uh, totally agree. I think flooding the position with defensive tackle. Last year, the Cardinals did that very cheaply. This year, they've made some more investments. All these guys have been between the ages of 26, 27 on some 3-year deals, which has been very fun. Let's quickly talk at least with some positional fallout, at least before we get into a little bit of the study. And then the other big news for today. There's a really interesting takeaway, as someone said, with signing of Jonah Williams, because for years, Bengals fans have wondered. He's a little bit shorter with arms. He's at least been a very good run blocker, came out of Alabama, has a huge kind of nasty mentality. I think the question a lot of people had was which side would he play on? Now, we've talked at least about how the Cardinals previously had said we're going to have Paris Johnson probably stay at right tackle. Jonah Williams has played right tackle before, but did play some left tackle this year. Which then brings up an interesting question, of course, which is you see this report from Mike Garafolo putting Paris Johnson to the left side and Jonah Williams on the right for the Cardinals. I feel like, Marcos, there's some people who said, well, if he played left tackle last season and you can kind of keep Paris at his strong spot, that may be good. I think that if you're going to be looking at this as a transitional time, I think that keeping two tackles is where most NFL teams are heading. They're starting to see the importance. But the blindside tackle is the one that's going to have to take on probably, if not the top edge rusher, you're the one who's in charge of making sure that the quarterback is not going to take on an extra injury from just being hit when he can't seem to sense the pocket. We've seen Kyler be able to make runs to his left, but he is a little bit more comfortable in that air raid style of rolling to his right. I think that there's a lot of intrigue you could have from either side. You could argue that if you put Paris, who's been able to kind of lock up and do well against pass rushers as a rookie and can be expected to take a step forward this year, Kyler could have the ability to bail out to his right, extend the play, get the ball to one of those larger targets. You could also argue that keeping Paris Johnson at the left side and being that long-term left tackle for the next 10 years, such as it was with DJ Humphries, that could also be something super important. Do you have a gut feeling about where you think the Cardinals would play Jonah Williams and Paris Johnson? And what would you do? And how does this even shake up with the 27th overall pick? Since it does seem like the Cardinals have flexibility. They are not forced into taking an offensive tackle with pick 4 or pick 27. Maybe not even at all with their first couple of picks.
Yeah, it'll be disappointing to me if they decide, because as we know, the early years of players' development are the most important. That a lot of times that can set their trajectories to the rest of their careers, and that could be what happens for the rest of their development when it comes to like them being a pro. So like with Paris Johnson, when they moved him to the right side, he had more experience, obviously being a left tackle, and then we all know that if he was drafted by another team, there's a possibility that he would have started at left tackle to begin with. So either they don't have the confidence of him holding up at left tackle, which is very disappointing. But this is one of those situations where I thought to myself, you guys spent the 6th overall pick. You guys moved up to go get him. You don't do that just to get a guy to play right tackle, which, by the way, he wasn't even the best tackle of last year's draft. Like, it's
Yeah.
kind of disappointing that his own teammate outplayed him as a 5th-round pick at right tackle. Move him to the left side because that's where his strength is supposed to be. We don't know if he's going to be a good right tackle the rest of his career, because switching him around in a type of scheme, especially when it comes to like a right-handed quarterback, that means his whole mantra had to be switched around. That means his whole mentality had to be switched around. That means he had to do what tackles and what offensive line have said when you switch one guy from one side to the other. And so, why even screw around with his development? Like Jonah Williams, and I looked at his stats, and I looked at him as a right tackle. He fits better profiled as a right tackle. He
Yeah.
he performed better as a right tackle, and he could hold up obviously at right tackle. We know what we have with him. So if they're not giving snaps to Paris Johnson at left tackle, and they're just gonna go ahead and conceive and say like, no, we're just gonna keep him at right tackle. Well, once again, you're stunting the development. Now you're developing him as a pro style, tackle on the right side, and then when you need him to move to the left side, which is supposed to be his natural position, which we've seen that happen before. We saw it happen with DJ Humphries. DJ Humphries wasn't holding up well at right tackle. They moved him to the left side. He started showing that he's a starting caliber tackle once they moved him back to the left. You do the same thing
Yeah.
with Paris Johnson. Let's just say he has an amazing year at left tackle, then that made that pick and that move up worth it. But if he has another type of year where he's good, but he's getting better at right tackle, then what happens when we have to move into left tackle when we are supposed to,
Right.
move off of whoever we have at left?
It's a good question, at least, especially because I think that there is an opportunity for the Arizona Cardinals to, I had said this too as well, excuse me, you could theoretically still draft your offensive left tackle of the future at that 27th pick, and he wouldn't have to play right away. You'd be kind of locking it up long term. You wouldn't be forcing a guy who may not be ready into that role. We've seen the Cardinals be able to get rookies worked in. But like you said, essentially it's a 2-year deal. You have some dead money if you cut him after this year for Jonah Williams, if it just flames out. But I think that it does set it up where you do have some flexibility. The other thing that I think I take away from positional fallout, and this is because you take a look at the Cardinals, they probably had 3 guys who could argue for that slot receiver role this year. I think there's two things that you can take away. The first one, I think, is it's time to light the torch. That's what people have been wondering. People have been asking for this for the past couple of years. Greg Dortch is in a spot, at least, where he now actually will probably get to compete against a rookie that gets picked, or will be able to work on something different, which is kind of cool. Let me go ahead here and share the screen with a little bit of the highlights that we have. We got Greg Dortch with some of these highlights that it's really fun to see.
I put
We've
that
got
clip as well, that back shoulder.
Yeah, exactly. The back shoulder that was on there. At least I was going to say we can show that right after this. But really, this is one of those things with Cardinals fans. We've been wanting Greg Dortch to be able to get these type of opportunities for a while. We finally are going to get that chance, and it's going to be super fun. Let's pull up that little clip, at least, that you've had here of getting some stuff ready
It's
with
uncut,
the likes
so
of Greg Dortch.
it's pre-cut, but you see how you see how what I do when it has to come to like Cundies up, but that's what I'm talking about right there. As a 5'7".
That's fantastic stuff there, at least for the most part. Yeah, no, you see at least Kyler just sees that, immediately throws the ball, goes up and is able to get it. That's one of the spots of why we said, like, if you're going to move on from Rondale Moore, you get to move on from a Hollywood Brown. You do feel like that on this tendered amount, you're probably going to get a good amount of production. You're probably going to also draft in a guy that fits your system better in the NFL draft, at least, who can be one of those guys getting 2 receivers and a receiver-heavy draft. And I think this is a pretty solid approach for the Arizona Cardinals to take.
Sorry,
especially when you got a guy who can make plays like this.
Yeah, my AirPod died, so I was like, "Oh, let me rush in and get my my headphones on." But yeah, this is exactly what I was talking about when I mentioned about like a shorter receiver, just doing like, look at that. That's over. I forgot what his name was. That former Steelers like son.
Joey Porter Jr.
Joey Porter Jr.
About. Yeah,
that was over Joey Porter Jr. That's their CB1. He threw a back shoulder fade to Greg Dortch while he was being covered by CB1. Look how draped he is on him. He's like in position to be able to make a play on that ball. He has like at least a couple inches of like separation right there, but he threw it to the side where he knew he could catch it. And he had that trust with him. He just threw it to the outside. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to trust that you go up and get it." He turns around. He's able to track that ball and he comes down with it. Those are the type of throws. Those are the type of throws that you make to like taller wide receivers most of the time. And he's making it to a 5'7" receiver that can fight through contact. So yeah, like, I mean, I don't know if that was in the highlight reel. That should be in the highlight reel. That might not look like the most amazing catch, but it takes so much to be able to succeed off that catch. He was pressed at the line of scrimmage. His momentum is going to be slowed down because he's a smaller guy, but the important thing is he's not giving up on the route. Like, he knew that if he was going to be pressed at the line of scrimmage, especially by this taller cornerback, that he was still going to have to like try to swipe and get to the outside where he thought he was going to get the ball. And that's exactly what happened here. He fights through it, extends his arm out, wins the outside, makes that catch, turns around. Look at him, and he's pointing. Look at him. That's God. The guy just has some incredible like his not cockiness, his confidence. Look at that confidence right there. He's just like, move the ball, man. Like,
yes.
Congrats, Dortch. I'm
congrats to Greg Dortch. My biggest hope is let's have him go through, have a great season, being able to see that efficiency, also stay healthy. But with each of the places and the times he's been tendered, a lot of times we talk about like this generational amount of money that players can get paid. Because when you're an undrafted free agent, it's that much harder to be able to, you have to get tendered either at different rounds or have different trades or long-term approaches. Tony Jefferson, one of those guys who fought for that, was able to get it as an undrafted free agent. Undrafted free agent soon. We hope that Greg Dortch will be one of the same. Let's go ahead here and check out. There's a little bit of other little late breaking news that has just kind of popped up, at least as well. That's been very interesting. First, Josina Anderson on there saying the Eagles were working to trade for quarterback Kenny Pickett, and that is done. He is now the backup quarterback, at least for the Philadelphia Eagles. They end up getting pick number 98 and 2 7th-round picks. Eagles get Kenny Pickett. Similar value to Sam Howell. Wow. Marcos, this is a pick that I really did not like in the 2022 NFL draft. There just seemed like there were no quarterbacks that seemed to be worth drafting, at least in the first round. And we still will see teams go and reach up for one of those guys. We got to see, I think, in Kenny Pickett was the only first-round quarterback who was taken, a guy without that much upside. What's really funny is you take a look at the list of quarterbacks who were taken in the 2022 draft, and it shows just how much of the draft last year, a lot of teams, I think, recognized there were two good quarterbacks at least, and they went 1-2. The quarterbacks in 2022 are pretty rough, but teams still needed to get some. Let's read off some of these here real quick from the 2022 draft. Kenny Pickett was taken first, then there's Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Bailey Zappi, Sam Howell. All of these guys have been on different teams or in a backup role. The only quarterback who's hit so far of that 2022 draft was just in the Super Bowl in Brock Purdy. I think there's a huge amount of fallout that we will see from Russell Wilson being just the starter for the Steelers this year. The Steelers giving up that quickly on Kenny Pickett, I think, is just one of those places of recognizing, just like the Arizona Cardinals in 2018 when they made up that move for Josh Rosen, you're better off in kind of ripping that band-aid off sooner versus later. Now, there is another spot, at least, of trade terms that did come up today for the most part, at least, and that's, I think, where we're going to end our show today talking about, and that's going to be the Minnesota Vikings have made a move. And this has been a really, really interesting place for the most part because the Minnesota Vikings made a trade up. They're going to now be picking at least where the Houston Texans were picking with the 23rd pick. Houston, in the meantime, those Houston Texans, they now pick 42nd with their first pick, 188, and they have their second round pick of the Minnesota Vikings in 2025. The question, of course, is, okay, Vikings, Kirk Cousins leaves to Atlanta. There's about a 3 to 4 top 10 quarterbacks we're expecting. Everyone assumes it's going to be Caleb Williams first, followed by a lot of people are assuming that Jaden Daniels is a lock at that second overall pick to Washington. You now get the Patriots, at least. A lot of people have been looking at them taking a quarterback. This would set up the Cardinals with Marvin Harrison Jr. But then you get the Los Angeles Chargers, who do not need a quarterback, have looked to maybe trade back. And you have the New York Giants, who could very well take a quarterback with the 6th pick. It does feel like Daniel Jones, with the injury, with some of the issues, he may end up being in that Kenny Pickett spot pretty soon as well. Which brings up an interesting question, of course, which is, here's one of the possibilities for the for the Minnesota Vikings to jump the New York Giants. The first call, and this is Dane Brugler, one of the best kind of mock drafters, has his ear to the league. They offer picks 11, 23, and then a sweetener. What that sweetener could be for the number 3 overall pick. Try to see if they could then leap teams, get that third best quarterback, Marcos. That would probably be, from what most people think, would be Drake May, the quarterback who is coming out of North Carolina, who seemed to be a lock for the second quarterback spot. Then you look at Cliff Kingsbury going to the likes of Washington. You look at Jaden Daniels winning the Heisman Trophy. Some of that skill set fits together. I think the question that a lot of people have now is, what does this mean if the Patriots stay put? Let's say they take a quarterback. Would the Minnesota Vikings still try to move up into the top 5, but could it be with the Arizona Cardinals at number 4 overall? That's what a lot of Cardinals fans are wondering. Could the Cardinals see this deal where it's be number 11, pick 23? And let's say that just for a kicker, they don't have a second round pick this year. What if they throw in a first round pick next year, Marcos, to the Arizona Cardinals? Then it becomes an interesting and difficult decision to be able to make. What are some of your thoughts, at least with some of the fallout, is now the Vikings have 2 first round picks, no Kirk Cousins, and a need for a quarterback?
Well, I don't know if you listened to what Justin Jefferson said, but he said he really wanted, or he thought that a perfect good quarterback in that position would have been what was the Bears quarterback? I keep forgetting what his name is. The guy that nobody wants to trade for now suddenly.
Oh, Mr. Fields, Justin Fields.
Justin Fields. There you go. So he said, he would think he would be a solid quarterback in that position. Yeah, it's in a situation for the Minnesota Vikings where they just got kind of like the rug pulled from under them, because there was talks about Kirk Cousins possibly wanting to stay there and them figuring out what to do. And of course, now that he's with Atlanta has all those weapons, all those beautiful weapons over there. And I mean, he doesn't have a Justin Jefferson in Atlanta, but he has a playmaking running back. He has who's supposed to be a transcendent type of tight end, and Kyle Pitts, who for some reason doesn't get utilized the right way. So hopefully he will now. And Drake, Drake London as his top wide receiver.
And Rondale Moore's there now too.
And Rondale Moore, yeah, exactly. So that's the move guy right there. That's the motion guy that they're gonna have there. So Rondale Moore as a motion guy, he could do the job. So, so now with that Vikings being in that kind of caught in that position of like, okay, we're in this position where now we have to get desperate. So
Yeah.
we have to make the move. So they do have to get aggressive because they essentially did, choose Justin Jefferson over Kirk Cousins. It was going to be one of those two. It was going to be hard to retain both of them. So I would believe that, like in this situation, you got to try to get as much as you can. Now, I heard that they got Sam Darnold, right, as their quarterback.
Yep.
I don't know how much
One
trust.
year deal.
Yeah, I don't know how much trust I'd give for Sam Darnold, given the fact that like he hasn't been able to stay consistent. He was a former number 3 overall pick or number 2 overall pick that looked solid his first year, but like hasn't really been able to like move forward from there. So
Yep.
I mean, the options are just kind of slim. So yeah, they have to get aggressive. They have to do that if they really want to be in on Justin Fields. That's one position they should be trying to like go after, especially
Yeah.
if the wide receiver is like giving it the stamp of approval and saying like, look, man, I want this guy throwing me the ball because I have
Yeah.
faith in him. Um, but other than that, like if you're really gonna try to like get aggressive and make that trade and move up to like that number 3, given that the New England Patriots, I have no idea what plans they
Yep.
have. They don't have a quarterback either.
Right.
So it's one of those situations where it's going to be interesting looking forward. That's that up to right now, up to the draft to see what these teams do because it will affect what the Cardinals do. I mean, I have
Yeah.
heard talks about like, oh well, Marvin Harrison isn't going to make it to the Cardinals because the Patriots are going to take him because they're gonna get their what they're going to do is they're going to get the quarterback somehow. Maybe they'll make the trade for Justin Jefferson. I mean Justin Fields, maybe, or they'll finagle something, they'll figure something out, and they'll be like, hey, and you got to set him for success. So Marvin Harrison Jr., you guys got to
Hmm.
select him at the number 3 overall pick. And I'm like, yeah, I know these talks make me uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
maybe
It's
just
tough. Hmm.
that's why we have to be concerned about what they're doing, right? We have to keep up
Right.
what they're doing ahead of us because it
Yeah.
affects us.
That's true, and that's part of us having a top 4 pick. If the Cardinals had picked fifth, and I've mentioned this like with Matt Prater missing the kick, if the Cardinals had picked fifth, we'd probably be talking about a trade down because of the fact that you're looking at 3 solid quarterbacks in this class. Now, of course, it does come up what would be the cost of a take to move back? Because a lot of Cardinals fans, it's been almost like Marvin Harrison Jr. or bust. If someone called today and said, "Hey, we're offering you 3 first-round picks for that number 4 overall selection," I know Cardinals fans that would basically take that phone and they would hang it up immediately.
Hmm.
Of course, the area is you also want to make sure that you're not putting too much emphasis onto one player when you do have a ton of different needs as the Cardinals. And I think it's a worthwhile debate. If you feel
Yeah,
confident in Monty Ford to be able to draft more successfully than the previous regime, you'd want him to have more picks as
more
possible.
picks and
And
higher
I think
picks.
that's and it's also a place of, like you said, the New England Patriots. If you were given the opportunity, if you're the Patriots, to add Justin Fields as a starter, and you're able to add a Marvin Harrison Jr., I think the question comes up: do you add with that roster? And looking how Justin Fields had struggled with the Bears, I do wonder if that would open up and say, hey, guess what? We don't need a quarterback at 3, but know who does? The Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings then trading up to 3. The Patriots have their quarterback already. They're comfortable then moving back a little ways. I think that you're right in that could be a possibility. I don't think that number 3 pick is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. because I think that the quarterbacks are too valuable. Someone's going to want to trade back. Now, the question is, would that team be if the Vikings decided we're going to trade up, we'll include our first round pick next year? We saw Monty Ford trade back last year. Could the Cardinals be one of those teams? Now, the kind of friend of the show and also like former co-host, at least back when it was the Revenge of the Birds podcast, Johnny Venerable, he's pretty dialed in with stuff. He says that he would expect Byron Murphy the second to be a target. Cardinals are looking to upgrade against stopping the run. You're probably not going to get your top pass rush target unless you're actually trading back up. So if you're taking a look at around range 11 overall where the Vikings are, that would be one of the guys you'd look at. We've been able to see, at least others have talked about, that the expectation is the Cardinals would stay put. I would say, at least if I had to look at this exact specific moment, we can take a look at this with the overall draft order, Marcos. Let's pop into our mock draft. As of right now, let's say that this is where things fall. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May. You're on the board as the number 4 overall pick. The Minnesota Vikings are offering you some picks to be able to trade up. Let's see what we have. Doesn't look like they're making it here, but they've got pick 11, pick 23. And let's say that they're like, hey, look, we're going to get JJ McCarthy. We're really looking to get a pick. They do not have a second round pick in 2025 right now. They've already given that up. They only really have now their first round pick next year. That's pretty similar to what you're talking about with last year. It's a better deal than you got from the Houston Texans trade back. You're just having to move all the way back to 11. If the Vikings had a second round pick here, I think that'd be a little bit easier to make that move up, be able to make that move back. I think instead what you'd probably look for, Marcos, is they're either going to have to offer you round one, straight up, just we'll give you essentially 3 first round picks to move up to get our quarterback. And of those quarterbacks between JJ McCarthy and Drake May, I would feel a lot more confident in Drake May, who kind of carried that North Carolina offense, than JJ McCarthy, who was efficient and effective. But I think in this scenario, even if they say, hey, you're asking for that round one overall pick at least, I have a feeling that the Vikings are not going to want to give up that round one pick next year. The reason why is because you take a look at this would be a trade similar to the Carolina Panthers giving up essentially their first round pick, giving up a guy worth a first round pick in DJ Moore, and giving up their first rounder next year, and then ending up with the number one overall pick in Caleb Williams going to the Bears. I think in this scenario, here's what I think that they would do. I think that the Vikings would offer pick 11, pick 23. I could see them then offering something like pick 129 and their round 3 pick next year. Or they could even offer a round 2 pick in 2026, which would be equivalent to this round 3 pick in 2025 to try to get up to number 4. As of right now, Marcos, would you take that deal if it's there? Because I would have to say I would probably want more if I'm the Arizona Cardinals. If I'm passing a Marvin Harrison Jr., I want the round 1 selection. So then that brings up the question, would you, Marcos, make that trade, give up on Marvin Harrison Jr. for that 3 first round pick haul if the Minnesota Vikings offer it?
I would take it because, to be quite honest with you, like, I know that I put a lot on like Marvin Harrison Jr., but he's not going to be the end all be all in this deep wide receiver draft. So, I mean, my hopes would be that Roma Dunze would be available at the number 11. I don't think that's going to be possible. I think it's going to be gone way before then. So you try to just get yourself a tall, good target, because this wide receiver draft, this wide receiver class is supposed to be the best class that there has been in the last 5 or 6 years, and the 2020 class, I believe, was like the last historic wide receiver class that was like that talented and that deep. And I mean, there's other targets that you can get in the draft. I mean, there's you could even like kind of swap that wide receiver need at the first round pick and pick him in the second first round pick and get Adonis
Right.
Mitchell. I believe that's
Yeah.
his name, Adonis Mitchell, who has
Yep.
a really similar
I know
skill
that.
set to like Marvin Harrison and a Roma Dunze, tall guy,
Right.
runs smooth, runs in the 4.4s. He's a smooth operator. That's what I call him. When I see him, I was like, that guy runs
Yeah.
smooth. He runs smooth routes. He has pretty good hands and whatnot. But I mean, that I would still take it. I just wouldn't be happy about
Yeah.
it. But I know that means that's more top notch picks that you get to be able to fill up gaps and then fill up more of the base of the team, instead of having like a situation where you have stars at certain positions. You bring up the floor of your team higher,
Yeah.
because now they're at a higher depth, because you have solid players and good players all like more around the team. So and it gives you more options to be able to operate.
Yeah. So let's go ahead here. Let's play out this scenario. Let's say that this is what happens. The New England Patriots say we can't afford to pass on a quarterback. We're in a spot at least where we're not really in favor of trading for Justin Fields and having Jacoby Brissett. Let's go and get our future right now. And let's say the Cardinals do get this offer. They would then get pick 11, 23, 27, and 35. So you're talking at least about 4 picks in the top 35, because you go from 2 first rounders to essentially 3 first rounders this year, plus actually I should say, because they have Houston, it'd be 4 first. They're giving up the 4th pick. It would be 4 top 35 picks. So let's go ahead here and get this trade taken care of. Vikings are on the clock now. Obviously, you're going to be taking at least the next best quarterback here on the board, JJ McCarthy. The number 5 overall pick here belongs to the Chargers. Now, the Giants, they're kind of out of luck. They probably are going to be looking to trade back. The team that was looking to trade back on the Chargers potentially, they're out of luck here. They do, however, have an opportunity at least now, and in this spot, I think they would probably go with Marvin Harrison Jr. One of the things that I'm curious about is at pick 11, with what the Cardinals have, Marcos, would there be an option for the Cardinals, at least if they wanted to look at trying to trade back up with the draft capital here because you're at pick 5, you have pick 11. Could you potentially trade pick 11, pick 23, and say pick 35? Give up that second round pick, and then you recognize, hey, we've got 2 first round picks next year. We're good with staying at pick 27. We can trade back from that. We don't have to worry about that second round pick. This would be very similar to the Paris Johnson trade last year. Maybe you throw in
Right.
something later like that. The question, of course, is if I'm the Chargers, do I take that trade back to say, hey, guess what? I was going to be having pick number 5. Now all of a sudden, I've got the 2 first round picks. I've got 3 top 35 picks. Cardinals, you can then rest in knowing you've got a first rounder next year from Minnesota, kind of like the Texans did this year. Would you try to give up that trade if the Chargers would take the phone call? And if you're the Chargers, would you even pick up the phone, or would you just run to the podium to take Marvin Harrison Jr.?
I mean, he's still on the board, so I guess I would just, like you said, it's a similar to Paris Johnson situation where we traded back from number 3, and then we traded back in to like number 5. So I mean to number 6. So I mean, like I said, if he's still on the board, obviously. We knew he was going to still be on the board. We basically just gained an extra pick and just kind of swap things around. So I mean, yeah, I would probably trade right back to number 5,
Yeah.
like knowing that Marvin Harrison Jr. is there.
This is my best case scenario in which essentially you move back 1 spot, you give up 1 second round pick, you get the player that you still wanted, and you get a first round pick next year. So you essentially get a first round pick by moving back 1 spot, give up the second, and you're still able to get your guy. I think, though, in this scenario, just because we want to try to go through and see what could happen, it's hard for me to see that the Chargers would pass on an offensive lineman. I could see them wanting to move back. I could see it being where a team could trade up. But they did just deal away Keenan Allen for a 4th round pick. They also dealt away Mike Williams. Let's go in this scenario and have the Chargers unfortunately go and take Marvin Harrison Jr. with that next pick, getting their number 1 guy. Here you're also now looking at the Giants are in an interesting spot because the next best available quarterback between Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr., they're probably going to be taking the receiver, I'd think, in this spot, Marcos. And you're looking also at the best tackle going to the Titans, I think, in this mock-up. This is now where things get kind of interesting because the Falcons have a quarterback. The Cardinals have a bunch of 3rd round picks. You could probably hop up back to around pick number 7 or pick number 8, giving up one of those 3rd round picks. I think that in this spot, the Titans would probably sit put. So now you come to the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons have Rome Odunze on the board. They have Brock Bowers on the board. You have Cooper DeJean. You can see even here with Byron Murphy II, this is one of those spots of where I think if you're in this place and you're the Cardinals, you also have the top pass rusher in Dallas Turner. Do you think that that would be worth giving up a potential pick to be able to see about going up and getting the likes of a Dallas Turner? Because you'd be talking about pick 11, pick 8. You're probably going to be able to give up maybe pick number, I would say at least, if not 35, 66 for the most part, but it probably would be 35. And let's say that you're going to get back pick, let's say it would be number 74 from the Falcons for that type of a move up. Who would be a player that you would look at or target? Because I would see, at least of this spot, there's one player that I would be interested most in for trading up for, and that'd be Rome Odunze. I think that the other player to look at would be the best pass rusher on the board in Dallas Turner. You also could, if you're the Falcons, you could just take Rome Odunze right here with that 8th overall pick. And I think that's what we're going to do here. If they do want to trade back, Marcos, would you pick Odunze or would you pick the edge rusher if you're the Cardinals?
I would go with the Dunze. I would definitely go with the Dunze.
I think that
So
would
I
be
would-
the case too. And I think the Bears trading for Keenan Allen, I bet that they did that because there's a really high chance that Rome Odunze is just not going to be there when
Yeah,
they
he's not
pick
gonna
with
be
the
there.
9th overall pick. So working through at least with, looks like we've got a little bit of a buzz that's happening
Lag.
here with that trade going through at the lag. Yeah, so I think with the next few picks here, if you're talking about pick number 9, you can have an edge rusher potentially or a tackle for Chicago. The Jets are going to have to take probably an offensive lineman. I could see that being Fuaga or one of the other offensive linemen there. Maybe the Bears would look to trade back. I think at the end of the day, though, you're probably looking at a situation, the Cardinals, if you're going to get a top 3 wide receiver in that spot, you may have to trade up. And in this scenario, Cardinals were not able to trade up. I think that if you're talking about the next biggest need, you could say, hey, if the worst case scenario will come to pass, the Cardinals trade back. Could a Dallas Turner be there? He's probably the one defensive player that I could see go here at picks 8 or 9. The best scenario for you to get a Dallas Turner is that, just like this scenario, the Falcons go ahead and take that other receiver. The Bears don't take the edge rusher, and the offensive tackle goes to the Jets. Then you could probably say, hey, last year the Cardinals, they traded back out of Will Anderson Jr. They get a draft pick to get Paris Johnson, and they're able to get the best pass rusher in the draft a year later. I think we'll have to be able to see what it goes like with the 23rd overall pick. In this scenario, I think I would probably load up on the defensive line, and I would double check to see if I'd be able to go ahead and move toward getting another receiver like a Brian Thomas or an A.D. Mitchell, like you said. I think that a lot of those guys, at least for the most part, who will be there on the board for the Arizona Cardinals will definitely be off at this point. I'm going to go ahead here real quick and pull up a second trade thing. So this would be a scenario in which, let me take a look here. Yeah, let's take a look here. And this would be the J.J. McCarthy trade. Whoop. All right, so in this scenario here, this is the one I think is most likely. I would switch Jaden Daniels and Drake May. I think the Cardinals still end up with Marvin Harrison Jr. But if they were going to make this trade with a team such as the Minnesota Vikings, where they get pick 11, pick 23, give it for pick 4, get that round 1 pick next year. Here is where I think we would see the draft resume. So now you've got at least 11th on the clock. You can see that they're able to take, if not Jared Verse, you see Dallas Turner went at pick 9. And this spot, I think it'd be pretty easy to say, do you take a Joe Alt? Do you take a Byron Murphy the second? I would probably say that you could also get the top cornerback on the board here in Quinion Mitchell. Let's go ahead and go with what we had talked about here, which was taking one of Byron Murphy or Dallas Turner. And let's see how the draft falls then with the last 2 picks for the Cardinals. So you got pick 23 and pick 27. Dude, you got Jerzan Newton is still here on the board. He's not usually there at 27. You already took a defensive tackle. You've got, I don't know if they'll take Nate Wiggins. I think I have a pretty clear idea of what I would do here. I would take the edge rusher, Laitu Latu. You already have a defensive tackle. You're needing to get a pass rusher here. I would draft Laitu Latu. And then a couple picks later, you can see how Darius Robinson went, Nate Wiggins went. I think in this scenario here, you got A.D. Mitchell, who's just sitting there waiting. I think it's pretty easy to say between one of him or Ladd McConkey would be there. I think you take the A.D. Mitchell. And this would be what your round would look like for the Arizona Cardinals with that trade back in that scenario. So if the Cardinals do pass on Marvin Harrison Jr., you get the 2 guys out of Texas. You get an edge rusher. You're filling all 3 of your biggest needs, at least, with the team. And, of course, draft rated at an A. I still think Marcos will run another mock draft scenario. Right now, I think, though, this is probably one of those places where if the Cardinals do trade back, this is what you're looking at. And that'll wrap it up for us today with the Redbird Reboot podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Marcos, if you want to shout out at least to the listeners who are coming, we listen to the podcast later today. I'll get that audio uploaded. And for those viewers who are here checking out what the Cardinals may do in this crazy scenario after we've seen some trades, some picks moved around, and still a need for the Cardinals at wide receiver, but maybe a bigger need for the Minnesota Vikings. Where can our readers and listeners and watchers, I should say, find you?
At Pancake Soul and AZ Sports Underground.
That's right. You'll have us also available. We'll have our clips there on revengeofthebirds.com, which is where I help write for. Find me also at Blake Murphy 7. Make sure that you like and subscribe to our podcast. We're on all of the podcast platforms of Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcast, which is our new host with Anchor, as well as making sure that you follow at Redbird Reboot. For Marcos Labrada, I'm Blake Murphy 7. Take care, Cardinals fans. It's time for us to log off. See you next time.
Go Cardinals.